Greetings to all of you. I hope you all are doing well. And for those of you who do not know about me, my name is Jagjot. And I talk about non-duality. So let me begin with this small paragraph from the book Silence of the Heart by Robert Adams. And I'll just read the paragraph. No matter how many so-called problems you may appear to have, no matter what is going on in your life, good or bad, forget about that. It doesn't matter. Feel the presence of consciousness, the presence of pure awareness. Feel this in yourself. Do not think about, just feel it. When you begin to think about it, you spoil it. Allow the mind to rave on. Do not pay a bit attention to the mind. Whatever thoughts it brings you, whatever it tells you, pay no attention whatsoever to the mind. Feel the bliss. You are the bliss. There is absolutely nothing that you need or have to become. And then finally he says, do not search for enlightenment or liberation. You'll never find it. There's nowhere to look for it. When you look with your senses, where is liberation? Where is freedom? It doesn't exist. When you go beyond the senses, you pay attention. When you pay no attention to the senses and go beyond them by observing them, looking at them, and not reacting to them, then you find that you've always been in bliss. Bliss, happiness is your nature. You are that. The thing is that we are always conditioned in this way that we believe that happiness should come in a certain way to us. In other words, in another way, we think that the mind has to come to some sort of conclusion. That is how we imagine the happiness to come to us. That maybe we'll read more scriptures, we'll listen to more people, we'll do this, we'll do that. And then eventually, the mind will come to an understanding and automatically the suffering will drop. Because of that, whatever has been read or learned. Now, up to a certain point, that is definitely helpful. So the intellectual understanding, the concept, all the concepts are definitely very helpful. But that knowledge itself can become a roadblock to the final understanding. And that understanding, Robert says, is of the heart. Now, of course, the word heart here is also a conceptualization. And we are not talking about the organ, obviously. We're just talking about a space of awareness that is ever present. The problem is that the mind thinks that once it understands this concept, that once it sees the awareness, then automatically the thinking will drop. And thinking in the modern day has become the bane of our existence, because it is the thinking which terrifies us. It has become the tyranny. But the problem is that the mind cannot be stopped by thinking, because thinking about stopping the thinking is also a thought. But if there is an observation of a totally different kind, an observation that is direct, an observation that is unbiased, that is unprejudiced, then something very different happens. We start seeing things the way they are, rather than the way they should or should not be. And that itself brings about the change. So the understanding that comes from that seeing is not a personal understanding. It is not an understanding of the mind, but it is an insight. Insight which is not a function of time, but a spontaneous, instantaneous recognition of the reality. Now, I will just tell you what put me to this path was an instant recognition that every happiness comes bundled with unhappiness. Every happiness. And there is nothing I can do to break this split in duality. Absolutely nothing. And that is why Nisargadatta Maharaj says that between the banks of pain and pleasure, my life flows. Now, if I cling on to one of the banks and try to avoid the other, that creates my suffering. So clinging to pleasure to avoid pain, it is pretty obvious that yes, that brings suffering, because pleasure is not a continuous experience. And similarly, clinging to pain, which also happens, clinging to pain and avoiding pleasure also brings unhappiness. But if one is aware enough, one can see that these are the two dualistic splits that are inseparable in this flow of life. And any effort that we put to break this split also creates unhappiness. Therefore, enlightenment has often been given as a method, as a process to break this split. And from my understanding, I believe that there is nothing that can break this split of pain and pleasure, good and bad. This dualistic opposite keeps flowing in life. But the recognition of it, the total vision of it, changes the perspective. And it is a very profound change. It is difficult to describe it in words, but it is an abrupt shift in the perspective. And in that, the flow of life is accepted the way it is. Now, I will just give you one example. When my father passed away in 2014, there was a huge debt. And me and my brother and my mom, we were worried as to how this debt, we did not know about the debt earlier, but later on it came up that this debt my father owes, and I have to pay it. It was a huge sum. And the only solution was to sell a property and from that money, pay off the debt. But unfortunately, we were not finding any buyers at that time for that property. And the situation was, turning into this panic-stricken thing. And at one point, there came a point where I said that now this is beyond my control. Now, if I have to face the law, maybe I have to face the law, whatever the consequences, then so be it. And I just completely gave up. I completely gave up and I was just moving about my usual routine, my life. I was just having my tea, coffee. I was taking walks in the garden, listening to music. And I was not the least bothered about what is going to happen. Maybe I'm going to be served a notice or what is going to happen. I was not at all bothered by that. But then something amazing happened and my brother called up and said that we have a buyer. And somehow that deal clicked and I was able to pay off the debt. Now, the thing was that during this time, if there was this understanding that I have to do this, otherwise I will be in trouble, then I would have constantly ruminated on a situation that was likely to happen in future. But abruptly what happened at that point, this is many years back. Abruptly what happened at that point, that an understanding came that what is destined to happen is going to happen no matter what. And if I have tried my level best, whatever I could do, then beyond that, I cannot be concerned with the outcome. And somehow that brought an immense sense of peace. It was not a resignation. It was not a fatalistic attitude. It was actually quite a liberating attitude. Liberating in the sense that it was completely accepted as to, whatever has to happen will happen. And there was another situation where me and my brother, we invested in something and where we did not get the money. We lost that deal. And it was a huge blow. But during that time, there was no trouble because it was completely understandable that what is destined to happen will happen. Now, it is not that we did not do anything on our part. Like we did everything we could in both the situations. But despite our doing, sometimes things may not go according to our plans. Despite trying to change people, they may not change. When we go with that understanding, then there is actually no conflict. Because the concept is that a change happens and change is not in doing of the individual. It is only the ego that thinks that it has the power, the capacity to change things. But the sages say that change is a happening and it takes time, and some changes happen, some changes do not happen. And once this understanding is there, the natural outcome is that our daily actions become spontaneous. That means the mind becomes rooted in the now, in the present moment. Now, it is not that the fear will not come. The fear may still show up. every now and then. But the thing is that that fear does not propagate and become suffering in the horizontal time. So the action that is taken in the moment is based on the understanding of the moment. And whatever the consequences of that action will be, whatever the result of that action will be, that is left to the universe. So if I get tied up with an outcome, that if I'm doing such and such action, then I should reach here or reach there, or achieve this or achieve that, that brings suffering. So here I create a distinction between the engaged mind and an involved mind. There is a very different quality to both. An engaged mind is a mind that actively participates in the world without worrying about the outcome. So it acts spontaneously. Say if I have to write an article or if I have to prepare for a speech, I'm just concerned about what I have to say next, what I have to write next. I'm not concerned what people will think about it or what will be the interpretation of that. How will I be perceived? In what light people will see my work? That is not my concern. That is the engaged mind. So that is a practical mind, so as to speak. So the practical mind, it takes care of the daily mundane stuff, the physical security, the comfort, and all those things. But then there is another mind, which is the involved mind. This is the ego mind. And this mind is concerned with the outcome. So it says that whatever I do, the result should be according to my expectations. And if my expectations are not met, then I will be unhappy. So you see, it creates an idea, it gets attached to that idea, and in that attachment, it creates suffering for itself. And this can even go to things such as seeking enlightenment. Sometimes the seeking itself becomes suffering because what exactly is being sought is not clear. If an idea is being sought, or if a concept has been formulated and that is being sought as a permanent state, as a permanent bliss, then that itself can become a trap. But once the mind is seen for what it is, the whole story of the ego mind drops away. And in that light, you simply be. So as Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi says, that your job is to be, not to be this or that. And the true liberation is knowing one's own true nature, and knowing not as an intellectual knowing, but the knowing of the heart. So your true nature is the being consciousness bliss, the Sat Chit Ananda. And these are not three different things. They are all pointing to the same eternal supreme truth. But that truth cannot be formulated as an object in the mind. That can only be experienced as the silence of the heart. So, Robert further says, now I will read just one more paragraph. People who are unhappy take the world too seriously. They take themselves too seriously. They take life too seriously. They think things are real and they're going to last. It makes no difference what position you are in in right now. It makes no difference what's going on in your life. It makes no difference where you are, who you are. The only thing you have to do is come to terms with yourself. When you understand yourself, how can you possibly be unhappy? Yourself is the self of the universe. This is by Robert Adams. And my grandfather, who passed away 2 years back, approximately 2 years back, or I think it must be about 1 year, 8 months to be exact. He was 98 years old. And he was a very staunch Punjabi Brahmin, like we call them Khatris here. So he was a professor of mathematics, and he used to read Guru Granth Sahib 3 hours a day. That was his daily routine after retirement. And in the end, towards his final years, I asked him that what is the essence of all life? Like, what has he learned? And his final words to me was that don't take all this too seriously. That was his final words. Don't take all of this too seriously. Just relax. And a person like him, I have never been that religious. My father was also not that religious, but my grandfather was. So, and this is something which I've heard from many elder people who I've spent time with. And they always say that when we are young, we get so involved with worldly affairs. We want to fix things. We want to change things. But then how do we know that we are even capable of changing things? How do we know that? How do I know if my beliefs right now, whatever they are actually in sync with my deeper self? That is the main question. And of course, a couple of years back, I was the same young, rebellious man. I was extremely opposed to all kinds of system. But then there was a deep contradiction. And the contradiction was that on the surface, I used to be like this person who wants a change, who wants to bring about a change, or who wants to change things, make the world a better place, and this and that, all the fancy ideas. But deep down, there was a contradiction. There was this irritation, restlessness. And then I used to wonder that, am I really qualified to make a change in the world? Or am I just chasing some sort of a fantasy? So I dropped the idea of changing the world. And I thought, let me spend some time with myself. Let me understand what exactly is going on here. And this is what Robert Adams says here, that once you understand your relationship with yourself, then automatically your relationship with the others also starts changing. Because once you understand that the way you are right now has been brought about by certain factors which were beyond your control, you also understand that even others, the way they are right now, has been brought about by factors which were not in their control. So blaming, condemning, shaming people is actually, it just creates a separation. As Jiddu Krishnamurti says, that The relationship is a mirror. What you don't see is the other person. You just see your own projected self. And once you have come to terms with your own self, it does not mean that you become this perfect, pious person. You may still be having all uh, negative qualities. You may still be reactive. You may still be aggressive, whatever it is. You may still be having addictions. But you have understood that this is the way it is, that it was not my doing, it is what happened. In that understanding, we don't create any kind of ill feeling towards ourselves. And when we learn to accept ourselves like that, only then we begin to accept others the way they are. Unless we are able to accept ourselves, we cannot accept others for the way they are. And this has been a personal experience because this has changed so much in my relationships, very close relationships, my relationship with my wife, with my children, with my mother, with my friends. Because now, again, yes, of course, it does not mean that one becomes a doormat or that one has to like the other person. It does not mean that. You can still have your choices. You can still prefer to be in company of some people and not to be in company of the others. And it is also not a denial that, yes, there is violence in the world. There are some people who have gone to an extent where they are unable to see anything clearly. But the only difference is that there is no hatred towards anyone. There is no deep resentment towards anyone. Because the fire of hate or resentment, it burns oneself more than the other, actually. The other person may not even be thinking about us. And we invent stories, we keep sticking to these stories. And these stories keep repeating in the mind. And the kind of torture we create for ourselves is. So once this reality is seen for what it is, the change that happens is that one becomes rooted in the moment rather than being in the dead past or in an imaginary future. And being in the moment, everything is seen the way it is, rather than the way it should or should not be. So we'll tap into this pure being now. We will sit silently for 15 minutes in this meditation, where we will just stay in this space of awareness. And there is no method for this. You can just sit comfortably the way you are. If you want to keep your eyes closed, you can. Otherwise, you can also keep them open. And nothing is to be resisted. Let whatever comes, let whatever thought comes, we are allowing everything to flow in this. So just make yourselves comfortable. Make sure you're relaxed. We begin by taking deep breaths. Just inhale and exhale. Allow the mind to settle down. Just be relaxed. Let everything be the way it is. Any sounds that you hear, any sensation that you experience, just let it be. You can open your eyes now. Just being in that spacious awareness itself is relaxing. That is why deep sleep, or as it is called sushupti in the scriptures, is a very important aspect of our lives. Without deep sleep, the mind cannot function optimally. And in the being, one experiences the same peace as one experiences in deep sleep. So I think we can now proceed to questions. If you have any questions or if you would like to share anything, you may raise your hand. You can press the raise hand button and I will unmute you. You know, I'll share one experience with you. When I started meditation a couple of years back, at that time I was just writing these articles. So I was not doing uh, the online meets or anything like that. And most of the time I used to spend in meditation because I had quit my job in 2015, and I did not want to go back to my corporate job. So I was exploring a totally different dimension of life. But yes, again, there was this thing that somehow there was this idea that the more I meditate, the more my mind will become calm. And in that endeavor, I used to push myself to meditate. So I thought that the length of my meditation is directly proportional to to the to the progress, my spiritual progress, or to enlightenment. And that did not turn out to be the case, because spending long hours in meditation actually end up giving me a bad back and some pain in the knees as well. And then I questioned as to who is doing this meditation and what is this urgency for the mind to become quiet. And there the answer came, not as a thought, but as an understanding, that it is this it is the movement of this sense of personal identification that thinks that it can achieve something through meditation. So putting effort in meditation actually made my mind more restless rather than experiencing calm or bliss. The meditation happens when the meditator dissolves in meditation. So my philosophy at that time was that I'm not going to stop anything from happening. Even if I drift off to sleep in meditation, that is absolutely okay. That is absolutely okay, because the mind may be troubled and it needs rest. That is what I see at that point. But when I see people who prescribe meditation as a practice to achieve self realization, they think that by being vigilant, by trying to force yourself to be in the present moment, one can somehow achieve that state of permanent bliss. But the thing is that fighting the mind makes the mind more restless. And it is the nature of mind to flow. So the idea was that, okay, then let the mind do whatever it wants to do. Leave the mind alone and let's play and see what happens. And then there was something beautiful that happened. The mind started becoming calm by itself without any effort to make it calm. And this is something which one can think of. It is not to say that other practices do not help. There are practices of concentration, breath regulation, all are extremely beneficial. But as Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi said, that the sense of I, if that is dominant, then it assumes to be the practitioner of all practices, all methods. But if that I is seen for what it is, then it does not have the energy to flow. So it goes back into the self, the pure self. And that, I believe, what Robert Adam also said here, where he says that the only thing you have to do is to come to terms with yourself. When you understand yourself, how can you possibly be unhappy? Yourself is the self of the universe. So this small self which we think we are, that we are not. Everything is the universal self. And the other day, my daughter, she's 12 years old. She asked me, she says, Papa, so you say that all is one. I said, yes, all is one. So that means I am God. Then I said that there is a better way of looking at it than saying I am God. And that is an understanding that God is all there is. Now, God, by God, I don't mean an entity that is powerful, that sits up in the high heavens and passes judgments. By God, I simply mean this consciousness, which is painting this experience of life every moment. So Nisargadatta Maharaj says that the reality has to be found in the objectivity. So there is nothing apart from God. God, or call it consciousness. If you don't like the word God, you can call it consciousness. Call it Brahman, whatever you want to call it, you can. But that does not exist apart from this world, from this reality. And that is our true nature. A recognition of that drops the involvement of the mind and brings out the engagement of the mind, which is the creative aspect of the mind. So the mind that is concerned with the outcome simply fades away. And the mind which is in the moment, acting spontaneously, that mind emerges, which is the creative mind. And the creative mind sees things as they are. So that is the concept. But it is still a concept. And my concept does not necessarily have to be your reality. So verify this with your personal experience. And we shall meet again in subsequent meetings and see if something has changed. So I think with this, I will conclude this session. And thank you all very much for coming here. It is wonderful to speak to all of you. If there is any question, you can ask me, or if you want, you can also email me your questions and I will revert on the email. Whatever you find comfortable, that's okay with me. So we will conclude for now.